Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small heartfelt request. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a like. It costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes a difference. I was folding laundry in the basement when I heard the transaction happening upstairs. "That's $15,000 for Maya." Carol's voice drifted down through the heating vents. "Clean papers, birth certificate dated last month. She'll be ready for transport Thursday." The basket of towels tumbled from my hands. Maya was the shy 8-year-old who had arrived at the Henderson house just 3 weeks ago. The same Maya who still wet the bed and called for her mama in Spanish during nightmares. I pressed my ear against the ceiling vent, my heart hammering against my ribs. "The buyer specifically requested Asian features," a man's gravelly voice responded. "What about documentation for the older boy? Tommy? He's almost aged out anyway, 16 in November. We'll move him to the work program instead." Tommy. They were talking about Tommy Martinez, who helped me with calculus homework and dreamed of becoming an engineer. My legs gave out. I sank onto the concrete floor, understanding finally why children disappeared from the Henderson home without explanation. Why some kids received special visitors who never identified themselves. Why Carol had insisted I live in the converted basement room instead of upstairs with the other foster children. 23 years old, I had been their longest placement. They told everyone I was their success story, aging out, but choosing to stay and help with the younger children while attending community college. They never suspected I would discover their real business. The floorboards creaked overhead as footsteps moved toward the kitchen. I had maybe 10 minutes before Carol came downstairs to start dinner preparations. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. But who could I call? The police? What if they didn't believe me? What if the Hendersons had connections I didn't know about? I needed evidence, real evidence. And I needed to protect Maya, Tommy, and the 6 other children currently sleeping upstairs, unaware they were merchandise in a transaction they couldn't comprehend. The basement suddenly felt like a tomb. What I discovered next made the overheard conversation seem almost merciful. I had lived with Richard and Carol Henderson for 8 years, since I was 15, and my grandmother could no longer care for me. They presented themselves as dedicated foster parents who specialized in difficult older children. The state praised them for their success rates and their willingness to take teenagers others refused. I should have questioned why they kept me after I aged out. That night, after everyone was asleep, I crept upstairs to Richard's home office. He always locked it, but I had watched him enter the combination on his desk, safe, countless times. Maya's birthday, ironically enough. Inside the safe, I found manila folders labeled with children's names. Not just current residents, but kids who had left over the years. Each file contained original documents, birth certificates, social security cards, medical records. But there were duplicates, multiple birth certificates with different names, different parents, different birth dates. Jenny Kowalski, age 12, had 3 separate identities. One showed her as Jennifer Martinez, born in Texas. Another listed her as Jane Kim, born in California. The handwriting on each document was identical. My stomach churned as I photographed page after page, falsified medical records claiming children were orphans when they clearly weren't. Altered documentation changing ages to make teenagers appear younger or young children seem older. At the bottom of Tommy's file was a contract, detailed specifications about his placement in something called the Agricultural Youth Program in Nebraska. The payment schedule showed monthly installments totaling $8,000. Tommy wasn't going to college. He was being sold into what looked like forced labor. I found my own file at the very back. 8 years of forged progress reports to my caseworker, fabricated college enrollment documents, fake psychological evaluations claiming I was emotionally dependent on the Hendersons and would be traumatized by placement elsewhere. They had trapped me here deliberately. The office door creaked behind me. Carol stood in the doorway wearing her pink terry cloth bathrobe, but her expression was anything but motherly. "You always were too curious for your own good, Sarah," she said quietly. My hands were still holding Tommy's file, evidence scattered across Richard's mahogany desk. There was no pretending I had stumbled into the office by accident. 8 years, I whispered. "You've been doing this for 8 years that I know about." "Longer." Carol stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Richard started the operation when he was working for Child Protective Services. Amazing what you can accomplish when you control the paperwork." I thought about Mr. Henderson's previous job as a case manager. How many legitimate placements had he corrupted? How many children had he funneled into the system? Where is Maya really going? Carol sighed as if my question was tedious. Maya will have a very comfortable life with a family in Montana. They've been waiting 3 years for exactly the right child. You mean they've been waiting 3 years to buy a little girl? Don't be naive. Maya was removed from a crack house where she was being sexually abused by her mother's boyfriend. We're giving her an opportunity for a better life. The casual way she spoke about it made my skin crawl, as if human trafficking could be justified by comparing it to worse alternatives. What about their real families? Some of these children have relatives looking for them. Carol's laugh was bitter. Most on these kids come from families that don't want them, Sarah. Mothers who trade them for drugs, fathers in prison, relatives who can't afford another mouth to feed. We simply redirect them toward people who will value them. I clutched Tommy's file tighter. Tommy has a sister in California. I've seen the letters. Had a sister. She stopped writing 6 months ago. The past tense sent ice through my veins. What did you do? Carol's smile was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. The next morning brought a disturbing sense of normalcy. Carol made pancakes while Richard read the newspaper aloud to the younger children. Maya sat at the kitchen counter, carefully cutting her breakfast into tiny pieces, still wearing the Disney princess pajamas that Carol had bought her last week. I watched this domestic scene with new eyes, understanding that every kindness was calculated. The special breakfasts, the shopping trips for new clothes, the bedtime stories, all designed to make children compliant and grateful before they were sold. "Sarah, you look tired," Richard observed as he poured coffee. "Everything all right?" "Just stayed up too late studying," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. He nodded, but I caught the look that passed between him and Carol. They knew, I knew. The question was what they planned to do about it. After breakfast, Carol announced that Maya needed new shoes for school. The timing felt suspicious, but I couldn't object without raising further suspicion. "I'll take her to the mall this afternoon," Carol said. "Sarah, would you mind watching the others?" Tommy was loading the dishwasher when I approached him carefully. "Can I talk to you privately?" We went out to the backyard where the younger kids were playing on the swing set Richard had installed last summer, another prop in their elaborate performance. "Tommy, has anyone talked to you recently about job opportunities? Or mentioned something called the Agricultural Youth Program?" His face lit up. "Yeah! Mr. Henderson showed me some brochures last week. It's this amazing program in Nebraska where kids can work on farms while earning money for college. Room and board included, plus a $500 monthly stipend." My heart sank. "When are you supposed to leave?" "Next month, right after my birthday." He grinned. "I can't believe how lucky I am, Sarah. Most kids age out with nothing." I had to tell him. But how do you destroy someone's hopes while standing in broad daylight, surrounded by playing children, knowing the people responsible are watching from the kitchen window? "Tommy, I need you to listen very carefully." By evening, Tommy knew the truth, and we had a plan that could get us both killed. We waited until after midnight to meet in the detached garage behind the house. Tommy had been silent through dinner, mechanically eating Carol's pot roast while processing what I had told him. "We need to document everything," I whispered, showing him the photos I had taken of the files. "But we also need to get the other children to safety before we contact authorities." Tommy's jaw was set with determination that made him look much older than 16. "What about Maya? She's supposed to leave with Carol tomorrow." "I have an idea, but you're not going to like it," I had spent the afternoon researching the agricultural youth program online. It was real. A legitimate organization that placed at-risk teenagers in supervised farm work programs. The Hendersons had simply created fake documentation to funnel children into what appeared to be similar arrangements, but without oversight or protection. I found contact information for the real program director, I continued. If we can get him to verify that your paperwork is fraudulent, it creates a paper trail that even corrupt local officials can't ignore. Tommy nodded grimly. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow morning, you're going to be very excited about your upcoming placement. Ask Richard lots of questions. Ask to call the program director to thank him personally. Make Richard sweat. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to Maya's room during her shopping trip. Carol always forgets something and comes back. When she does, she'll find Maya sick and unable to travel. It was dangerous. If Carol suspected I had made Maya sick deliberately, there would be consequences. But buying time was our only option. Tommy grabbed my arm. Sarah, what if they figure out what we're doing? What if they just make us disappear like the others? I had been asking myself the same question all day. The Hendersons had successfully operated this ring for years. They clearly had systems in place for dealing with problems. Then we make sure other people know where we are. The morning unfolded exactly as I had feared it would. Maya was indeed too sick to travel, complaining of stomach pain that Carol couldn't ignore in front of the other children. Tommy played his role perfectly, pestering Richard with enthusiastic questions about Nebraska until the man was visibly uncomfortable. But Carol returned from the aborted shopping trip with suspicion in her eyes and a new resolve that made the house feel like a pressure cooker about to explode. Maya will be ready to travel tomorrow, she announced over lunch. I've rescheduled the appointment. That afternoon, while the younger children napped, Carol cornered me in the laundry room. I need to know exactly what you think you're accomplishing, she said quietly. I continued folding tiny T-shirts that belonged to 6-year-old Luis, bought from the clearance rack at Walmart, but presented to him like gifts from loving parents. I don't know what you mean. Maya's sudden illness, Tommy's new interest in program details, your late-night excursions to Richard's office. She stepped closer. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? My hands stilled on Luis's Batman shirt. I don't want anyone to get hurt. No one is getting hurt, Sarah. These children are being placed with families who will love them. Families who are willing to pay significant money to ensure these kids have opportunities they would never have otherwise. Then why the fake documents? Why the secret payments? Why are you so afraid of oversight? Carol's composure cracked slightly. Because the system is broken. Because social workers are overworked and bureaucrats don't understand that sometimes unconventional solutions are necessary. Trafficking children is not a solution. The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek burned as Carol grabbed my shoulders. You have lived in this house for 8 years, she hissed. You have eaten our food, worn clothes we provided, slept safely in our home. You have no idea what would have happened to you without us. You kept me here as camouflage. Her grip tightened. We kept you here because you were useful. Don't make yourself less useful, Sarah. That threat hung over dinner like smoke from a forgotten candle. Richard carved chicken with methodical precision while Carol served vegetables with her usual bright chatter. The younger children ate quietly, sensing the tension they couldn't name. Maya pushed food around her plate, still pale from whatever had made her sick that morning. Tommy caught my eye across the table and raised an eyebrow slightly. Our plan was working, but barely. After dessert, Richard made an unexpected announcement. I have wonderful news. Sarah has been accepted to a special program through the state university. She'll be starting immediately. My blood turned to ice. What program? A residential program for young adults transitioning out of foster care, full scholarships, on-campus housing, intensive support services. His smile was warm and completely terrifying. You leave Sunday. 3 days from now, they were removing me from the equation. I haven't applied to any residential programs. We took the liberty of handling the paperwork. Sometimes opportunities require quick action. Carol beamed at me across the table. Isn't it wonderful, children? Sarah will finally get the education she deserves. The younger kids cheered obligingly. Maya managed a small smile. Tommy's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the fear in his eyes. After dinner, while helping with dishes, I whispered to Tommy, "Basement, 1 hour." When we met in the converted room that had been my home for 8 years, Tommy was carrying a backpack. "I'm leaving tonight," he said quietly. They moved up my transport date. Richard says I'm catching a bus to Nebraska at 6 a.m. That's not enough time. It has to be enough. He pulled a prepaid cell phone from his backpack. I bought this yesterday with money I've been saving. I'm going to call the Real Agricultural Program from the road and tell them someone is using their name fraudulently. What about the other children? Tommy's jaw tightened. You'll have to handle that part alone. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like lead. By dawn, Tommy was gone, and my window for action was closing rapidly. I found Richard in his office at 7 a.m., supposedly arranging my transportation to the residential program that didn't exist. He was actually on the phone with someone discussing replacement inventory for the upcoming delivery schedule. The original boy won't be available, Richard said into the phone. But we have a suitable alternative. Same age bracket, similar background. The clients shouldn't object to the substitution. They were replacing Tommy with another child, possibly Luis, who was small for his age and could pass for younger on falsified documents. When Richard finished his call, I knocked on the office doorframe. "We need to talk." He gestured for me to sit, his demeanor suddenly parental. "I know this transition feels sudden, Sarah, but sometimes life requires big changes. Where am I really going on Sunday?" Richard's smile faltered slightly. "I told you. The university program. There is no university program, just like there was no agricultural youth program for Tommy and no loving family in Montana for Maya." He leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with new calculation. "What exactly do you think you know?" "I know you've been trafficking children for years. I know Carol manufactures false documents. I know you have buyers lined up for Maya and Luis, and probably half the other kids in this house. And what do you plan to do with this knowledge?" His calmness was more unnerving than anger would have been. "I want to make a deal." Richard raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Let me take Maya and Luis to legitimate placements. Help me find real homes for them, and I'll disappear quietly. No authorities, no investigations, no problems for your operation." "Interesting proposal. What makes you think you have any leverage?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a text message I had composed but not yet sent. "Because Tommy didn't just run away. He's already contacted the Real Agricultural Youth Program. And if something happens to me, this phone will automatically send detailed evidence to the FBI field office in Richmond." That was a lie. I had no idea how to set up automatic message sending, and Tommy's phone call might not have accomplished anything. But Richard didn't know that. The negotiation that followed taught me that evil rarely announces itself with dramatic gestures. Richard poured himself coffee from the machine in his office and offered me a cup, as if we were discussing vacation plans instead of human trafficking. His civilized demeanor made the conversation surreal. "You're proposing to become complicit in our operation," he said thoughtfully. "Interesting development." "I'm proposing to minimize harm while protecting the children currently in your house. And in exchange, you want us to, what, retire gracefully?" I shook my head. "I want Maya and Luis placed with legitimate families. Real adoptions, real oversight, real futures. The other children can stay here as long as they're safe and treated properly." "You're naive if you think we can simply switch from our current model to traditional foster care. There are financial obligations, contracts already in place, people who have paid deposits." The casual mention of deposits made my stomach turn. "Then honor those contracts with children who are genuinely aging out and choose that path voluntarily." Richard sipped his coffee, considering. What about your residential program transport on Sunday? I'll disappear quietly, change my name, start over somewhere else. You tell everyone I went to college and lost touch gradually. And Tommy? Tommy was an emancipated minor who chose to leave. His sister in California will be relieved to hear from him. We sat in silence while Richard weighed the proposal. Outside his window, Maya was helping Luis tie his shoes for school, their heads bent together over laces that probably cost more than their birth mothers made in a week. "There's something you should understand, Sarah," Richard said finally. "This operation exists because there's demand. People want children and they're willing to pay considerable sums for them. If we stop providing that service, someone else will fill the gap, someone potentially much less careful about the children's welfare." "So you're providing a humanitarian service?" "I'm providing a pragmatic service. The children we place are genuinely better off than they would be in state care or returned to their original families." His rationalization was sophisticated and utterly horrifying. "Do you have an answer to my proposal?" Richard set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. What Richard said next changed everything I thought I knew about the Henderson operation. "Sarah, there's something about your own placement that you should understand before we finalize any agreements." The coffee cup felt cold in my hands. "What do you mean?" "When you arrived 8 years ago, you weren't a traditional foster placement. Your grandmother had contacted us specifically, seeking a special arrangement for a child she could no longer care for but didn't want in the general system." "My grandmother? The woman who had raised me after my parents died, who had been my whole world until dementia made her care impossible?" "Your grandmother paid us, Sarah. She paid us to ensure you received better treatment than standard foster care could provide. The private tutoring, the college preparatory courses, the stability, all of that was purchased with her life insurance payout." The room started spinning. "You're lying!" Richard opened his desk drawer and removed a familiar manila folder. My name was written on the tab in the same handwriting I had seen on the other children's files. Inside was a contract signed by Eleanor Morrison, my grandmother's careful signature, recognizable even with the slight tremor that had marked her final years. "Specialized placement for Sarah Morrison," I read aloud. "Enhanced educational opportunities, stable long-term housing, protection from system failures, payment schedule." The numbers blurred. $50,000, paid over 5 years. "She liquidated her retirement savings and took a reverse mortgage on her house," Richard explained, "all to ensure you wouldn't be shuffled between homes or lost in bureaucratic cracks. But she didn't know what you really do here. No, she believed we were simply a premium foster placement service, which in your case, we were." I thought about 8 years of private tutoring, college-level courses, my own room, stability that none of the other children experienced. I had assumed I was lucky. Instead, I had been purchased, legitimately, but purchased nonetheless. "So what am I now? A client or a commodity?" Richard's expression was almost sympathetic. "You're a young woman whose grandmother loved her very much, but you're also someone who now knows far too much about an operation she paid to keep you separate from." "Is that why you kept me after I aged out? To protect your secret?" "Initially, yes, but you've been genuinely helpful with the younger children. Less trauma, smoother transitions." I was their buffer, their human face. That afternoon, Maya disappeared. I had been processing Richard's revelation about my grandmother when Carol returned from errands without the 8-year-old who had left the house with her. "Where's Maya?" I asked as Carol unpacked groceries with unusual efficiency. "Maya is fine. She's with her new family, getting settled in." "You said she wouldn't travel until tomorrow." Carol's smile was tight. "Plans changed. The family was eager to meet her sooner." I felt like I was drowning. While I had been negotiating with Richard, distracted by revelations about my own past, they had simply proceeded with their original plan. "What family? Where?" "Sarah, Maya is exactly where she needs to be. She has parents who love her, siblings to play with, opportunities for education and growth. Isn't that what we all want for these children?" Luis wandered into the kitchen, looking around with confusion. Where'd Maya go? Maya went to live with her new mommy and daddy, Carol said brightly. Isn't that exciting? Luis nodded uncertainly, but I could see the question in his eyes. In his experience, people disappeared from this house without warning or explanation. That evening, I cornered Richard again. What happened to Maya wasn't part of our agreement. We didn't have an agreement. We had a discussion about a hypothetical arrangement. I want proof she's safe. And I want proof that your friend Tommy actually contacted the authorities he claims to have contacted. We stared at each other across his mahogany desk, both calling bluffs we weren't sure we could back up. Here's what's going to happen, Richard continued. You're going to pack your things tonight. Tomorrow morning, you're going to leave this house quietly and never come back. In exchange, no harm will come to any of the remaining children. And if I refuse, then everyone in this house becomes a liability that needs to be managed. The threat was crystal clear. If I pushed further, the Hendersons wouldn't just relocate problematic children. They would eliminate them. I thought about Luis, about shy Jennifer, about brave Tommy somewhere in Nebraska trying to expose an operation he didn't fully understand. I want to say goodbye to the children. Of course, you're like a big sister to them. 6 months later, I was working as a waitress in Portland, Oregon, when Detective Maria Santos found me. Sarah Morrison? She asked, sliding into the booth across from me during my break. I'm with the FBI's Human Trafficking Task Force. I believe you know Tommy Martinez. My blood ran cold. Is he safe? He's safe, and he's been very helpful in building our case against Richard and Carol Henderson. Tommy had done more than call the Agricultural Youth Program. He had contacted the real FBI and spent weeks providing detailed information about the Henderson operation. His testimony, combined with evidence from their financial records, had triggered a multi-state investigation. What about the other children? All safe. Maya Rodriguez was recovered from a family in Montana who claimed they had adopted her through a legitimate agency. They're actually victims, too. They paid $30,000 for falsified adoption papers. I closed my eyes, relief flooding through me. We need your testimony, Sarah. Tommy says you have photographs of documents, first-hand knowledge of their methods, information about other children who passed through that house. The trial lasted 8 weeks. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through 8 years of observations I hadn't understood at the time. Richard and Carol Henderson were convicted on 17 counts of human trafficking and sentenced to 25 years each. More importantly, the investigation exposed a network of corrupt social workers, falsified documents, and systemic failures that allowed the operation to continue for nearly a decade. Policy changes were implemented. Oversight was strengthened. Maya was placed with her aunt in Texas, who had been searching for her since she disappeared from foster care 2 years earlier. Luis was adopted by a family in Virginia who sent me pictures of him playing soccer and learning to read. Tommy finished high school through an alternative program and earned a scholarship to study engineering at Oregon State University. He visits every few months, still processing what we survived together. As for me, I use my real name now, Sarah Morrison, granddaughter of Eleanor Morrison, who spent her life savings to ensure I would be safe. She died while I was still living with the Hendersons, never knowing that her loving gesture had placed me at the center of something dark and complicated. But she also never knew that her love and my time in that house gave me the knowledge and strength to protect other children when it mattered most. Sometimes protection looks like rescue. Sometimes it looks like testimony. Sometimes it looks like standing up to evil even when you're terrified. The most important lesson I learned is this. When you see something wrong happening to vulnerable people, you have a choice. You can look away and tell yourself it's not your responsibility, or you can act, even if you're scared, even if you don't know what the outcome will be, because silence protects the wrong people. Thank you for listening to my story. If you suspect a child is being trafficked or abused, please contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-888-373-7888. And if this story resonated with you, please share it. The more people who understand how trafficking actually works, the harder it becomes for traffickers to operate. Your voice matters. Use it. Saras Morrison.